America had not only the racial issues to contend with, but there's going to be a very large anti immigration wave that hits the United States at the time. And there are multiple reasons why, one of which is people were concerned about immigrants bringing in ideas they didn't like. For example, the threat of communism was real to a lot of Americans. And so they were concerned that many of these immigrants coming in would bring unwanted communist beliefs with them. And so they were like, that's a problem. Also, at this point, the United States was starting to get kind of a glut in terms of the labor that they needed. Remember, for a long time, immigrants were a viable source of labor, cheap labor that businesses often needed. But by the 1920s, the need for immigrants was starting to slow down. And so ultimately, the United States says we don't need quite as many immigrants. Not only that, but the anti immigration wave was also fueled by just uh, flat out ignorance in a way. The wave of immigrants from 1900 to about 1920 from Europe was largely comprised of people from South and Eastern Europe who were different. Remember, a lot of immigrants in the late 1800s came from Great Britain, Germany to an extent, people who were more culturally similar to Americans. British people shared the language. A lot of the German people came over and they adapted rather quickly. And so they were seen as valuable members. They had productive skills, they were educated, they are immigrants who were valued. But the people from Southern and Eastern Europe did not have the same education levels. Their customs, their language is more different. And so when they come over, if they speak English at all, it's very broken English, and they're not seen as really that valuable. They're seen more of a hindrance than a help. And in many instances, human beings, their natural instinct when they don't understand a particular person or culture that they come from, they mock and ridicule them. And the more the differences are, the more it seems to ridicule. The United States has long had a bad history with anti-immigration from different places. The Chinese, who were used as cheap labor in building the railroad out west, Italians, Slavic people from Eastern Europe, because they speak different languages, they have different ways of living, like in terms of what they eat, what they read, how they act, their customs. They're seen as a problem. And so the anti-immigration wave is also seen as leading into something, a unique thing that we call the eugenics movement. And one of the things the United States does at the time, you see right here illustrated in this political cartoon, is they cut off the immigration rates. You see the Uncle Sam figure here putting in a rate at 3%, where they said particularly that whatever the current number of, say, Germans living in the United States was, will only take 3% of that number for the next year in terms of German immigrants. So that 3% status became the marker for a while, and throughout the 20s, they're going to restrict that on a number of occasions. Okay, but about this eugenics movement, the eugenics movement is something that Americans start buying into. That the Americans, that white Americans in particular, were perhaps a little bit scientifically bred to be better types of people. That maybe Americans, white Americans, were smarter because they just had certain genetic advantages over other people. And you see signs like this as part of the eugenics movement, the triangle of life. What you have is your environment, what you are is your heritage, and what you do is your based on your education. And it says you can improve your education and change your environment, but what you really are was all settled when your parents were born. And it's saying, listen, uh, we need to get rid of people who don't have good genes. And that's the idea, the driving force behind the eugenics movement, is to rid our society of people with bad genes. And notice that on the left side here, too, it says if all marriages were eugenic, we could breed out most of the unfitness in 3 generations. And the idea was, or one of the ideas about the eugenics movement was, we need to encourage people, smart people, to marry smart people, and we don't want people who aren't very intelligent to have children at all. And if you are somebody who's not that smart, you should marry somebody around the same station or class as you. That's one of the big ideas behind this. And that's not the only idea either, because they wanted to breed out bad genes. In many instances, people in the eugenics movement, they believed in abortions could be worthwhile. If a woman was pregnant and the two parents weren't necessarily the same, or there was going to be a genetic defect of some time, they didn't think that was going to be ideal, and so abortion was seen as a viable option. They'd set up eugenics, people who believed in eugenics set up displays like this, and you see that America needs more of these, and it says on the far right, this light flashes every 7.5 minutes, where all the really smart people who are creative and fit for leadership are born, and only 4% are born there. And on the left, it says we need less of these. Every 48 seconds, a person's born who will never grow up mentally beyond the stage of a normal 8-year-old boy or girl. Now, where they came up with those statistics, I'm not entirely sure, but they want you to think that there are way more unfit people than fit people being born. Not only did they believe in abortion, not only did they believe in arranged marriages or marriages of equal intelligence level, but they also believed in forcibly sterilizing people. You should get sterilized, and if you don't think so, or you're having too many children, maybe we need to have you committed to an institution, and you'd be forced to undergo a procedure where you would be forced to get sterilized. This is a kind of a poster advocating for eugenics, and it says only the healthy seed must be sown. And they look at it and say, if you have a genetic problem or an issue, why would you want to pass that on? It's also very common for people who were proponents of the eugenics movements to set up displays at like local county fairs. You see right here, they're setting up one of their displays to explain why it's a good idea. And not only that, but at many of these county fairs, you would have what were called fitter family contests, where you'd show off the members of your family and how physically great your family was, and how smart they were, and how good looking they were. That was very common. What you see here is a map where sterilization laws were in effect through the United States, and you see that these are in effect. This is throughout 1935. So in the grand scheme of things, forced sterilization is something that was still a thing. And most states have repealed these laws, or they never really enforced them. But the fact that it did happen, you're talking about tens of thousands of Americans who forcibly were sterilized. And that's a little scary to think about. You see here the comparison between children and animals. And they're like, listen, if we breed our chickens, our cattle, our pigs, then why are we not breeding people at the same time? So ultimately, that was something that they believed in. You see this particular little tree here, and you see a withered, dying tree, and they go all out with this. And you see at the bottom, the roots of the tree, the father's unknown, the mother's mentally defective. And out of all the people in the family tree, there's only one normal son. You have the rest are mentally defective, and you see one woman daughter's a prostitute before she's 15. And then you look on the other family tree, you see that these normal men and women who have children, they all turn out to be great people. And of course, we know now that that's not true for a number of reasons, but the eugenics movement wants you to believe that for sure. Okay?